The prison infirmary confirmed Sean Diddy Combs was admitted in critical condition. His health is completely weakened. He doesn't eat, doesn't hydrate, and seems to have given up fighting. Now he faces the devastating effects of excessive drug use and overwhelming depression. How did one of music's biggest icons get to this point? What are nurses revealing about your physical and mental state? And what could this mean for his future? Stay until the end to understand all the details of this dark story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more revelations and impactful stories. The nurse's report begins like this. When we heard that Sean Combs, aka Diddy, was being transferred to our prison, there was an inevitable buzz among us. After all, it's not every day that a global icon arrives here. But from the first moment, I knew he wasn't well. He walked through the infirmary door with a blank expression, something only those who work in this environment can immediately recognize. He was dealing with more than just the weight of prison. At first, he avoided any kind of interaction. Most inmates go through an adjustment period, but with him, it felt different. He didn't talk much, and when he did, it was almost always in a low, disconnected tone. The days passed, and his appearance began to change. He looked increasingly thin, with deep circles under his eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. I tried to talk to him a few times, as I do with any inmate. I asked if he needed anything, if he was in pain, but he simply shook his head, as if my words didn't even reach his mind. That's when I started to realize that isolation was taking a toll. The pressure of being here, the distance from his old life, and perhaps even the guilt, all of it was clearly weighing on him. As a nurse, I've seen a lot of people fall apart here, but something about him was different. It was as if he had lost the will to fight even before he started. Isolation not only cut him off from the outside world, but seemed to have stripped him of any desire to connect with others, even with himself. At first, it just seemed like common adaptive behavior. Many inmates, upon arrival, lose their appetite due to the emotional shock and hostile prison environment. But with Diddy, it didn't take long for us to realize it was something more serious. In the cafeteria, reports began to arrive. He wouldn't touch the food. Sometimes he would just pick up the tray to avoid attracting attention, but he would return it practically untouched. Other times, he didn't even bother leaving his cell at mealtime. For a man of his size, the impact was visible within a few days. The weight loss was quick and evident. When they brought him to the ward for the first time, I decided to ask him directly about his diet. He looked at me with an empty expression, as if he were lost in distant thoughts, and said, "I don't feel hungry." It's a phrase I've heard before, but the tone in which he said it, almost without emotion, left me worried. We decided to monitor it more closely. We also observed that he wasn't drinking enough water, which led to clear signs of dehydration, dry lips, dizziness, and even difficulty getting up. On the third day, he refused a full meal. I officially registered the situation as a critical case. The situation worsened when he began to complain of muscle weakness. He could barely walk to the infirmary, and, when he arrived, he leaned on the walls as if he were fighting his own body. The picture was clear. He was refusing to take care of himself. One of the most memorable scenes happened when we tried to offer a simple meal in the ward, just soup and bread, something light to ease the stomach. He looked at the tray for long seconds, but didn't touch anything. "It's no use," he muttered. "I don't feel like any of this makes a difference." Those words were not just about the food, but about his mental condition. It was at that moment that we had to act more firmly. He needed nutrients to survive, and we chose to start intravenous supplementation. Even so, his refusal to cooperate made the process exhausting for everyone. He wasn't just neglecting his diet, it looked like he was giving up on life. It was during the afternoon shift that everything happened. We received an urgent call from one of the guards. Diddy had passed out in his cell. When the team arrived, he was on the floor, pale, sweaty, and practically unconscious. His heartbeat was weak, and his breathing was irregular. We brought him to the infirmary as quickly as possible. As we placed him on the stretcher, I noticed how thin he was. His prison clothes, which were already loose, now seemed to be hanging off his body. The first priority was to stabilize him, but his vital signs were alarming. Extremely low blood pressure, clear signs of severe dehydration, and his skin was cold to the touch. We immediately decided to administer intravenous fluids. His body was in critical condition, and any delay could have irreversible consequences. As we connected the IV, his eyes opened for a brief moment. He looked confused, trying to focus on his surroundings, but soon passed out again. During the examination, we identified signs of hypotension and the beginning of hypoglycemia. I asked him, when he regained consciousness, if he had taken or used any substances that could have contributed to his condition. He shook his head slowly, but his blank stare indicated something deeper, a state of total apathy, as if he didn't care what was happening to his body. For protocol reasons, we collected samples for toxicological tests and confirmed what we already suspected. There were residues of chemical substances in his body. He was likely using drugs as a way to numb emotional pain and escape reality. It was a dangerous cycle. His body was failing, but his mind seemed to have given up first. The team worked tirelessly to stabilize him that night. As we monitored him, the lights and sounds from the devices filled the room, creating a tense atmosphere. He remained unconscious for hours, with the serum and medications slowly bringing some balance to his weakened body. At the end of the shift, he began to regain consciousness, but was still too weak to speak. His eyes opened, but again that empty, hopeless look dominated his expression. It was at that moment that I realized that we were not just dealing with a medical case. It was something much more complex, involving mental, emotional, and spiritual health. He needed more than treatments. I needed a reason to fight. After toxicological tests confirmed the presence of chemical substances in Diddy's body, the situation became even more delicate. It wasn't just a matter of malnutrition and dehydration. He was clearly using drugs, and this was worsening his physical and mental state. As a nurse, I have dealt with addiction cases before, but the combination of their history, public status, and emotional condition made it more challenging. He was confronted by medical staff. We asked him directly about the substances, but he avoided answering. He remained silent, looking at the ground, as if he were escaping from reality. It was clear he was using the drugs as a way to numb the pain he felt, but it was pushing his body to the limit. During the first few days in the ward, he demonstrated clear withdrawal symptoms. His hands were shaking, he was sweating excessively, and he complained of intense pain in his body, as well as an agitation that seemed unbearable. Sometimes he became restless to the point where he needed constant supervision to keep him from hurting himself. To deal with this, we had to introduce a detox protocol. It was an extremely difficult process, both for him and the team. We administer medications to alleviate withdrawal symptoms and monitor your vital signs constantly. He went through waves of lucidity and confusion. At times, he seemed to recognize the gravity of his situation, but soon he closed in on himself again. There was a defining moment that I will never forget. During one of these crises, he mumbled something that sounded like a cry for help. "I don't know how to stop anymore," he said, his voice barely audible. It was a rare glimpse of the person behind the armor he'd built over the years, and it reinforced the severity of the problem. In addition to physical treatment, we tried to introduce sessions with the prison psychologist, but he resisted. His reluctance to open up was a major obstacle, and the team knew that without addressing the emotional root of the problem, any progress would be temporary. The worst part for me was realizing he was fighting this battle alone. Despite all the attention he might have received on the outside, here inside he was just a man facing his own demons, with no visible support or motivation to get out of this situation. It wasn't just his body that was collapsing, it was his soul. If there's one thing that was evident from the start, it was the devastating impact that prison had on Diddy's mental health. He arrived here as a famous man with a powerful public image, but little by little he began to become a shadow of himself. In the ward, what caught the most attention was the blank look. There was a deep sadness about him, something that goes beyond regret or frustration. It was as if he had given up, as if there was no longer any reason to fight. Even on the rare occasions when we tried to start a conversation, he avoided eye contact, responding only with murmurs or an almost imperceptible nod of the head. Isolation only made things worse. He did not interact with other prisoners and preferred to stay in his cell for long periods without even going out for mandatory activities. This behavior led us to monitor him closely, worried about the risk of him trying something against himself. The few times he opened up, his words carried immense weight. "None of this matters anymore," he said in one of the darkest moments I've witnessed. It was clear he was sinking into a deep depression. He talked about regrets and seemed consumed by a sense of guilt, but at the same time, there was a barrier. He was unwilling or unable to accept help. We begin to notice physical signs associated with depression. In addition to weight loss, he had a hunched posture, as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. His speech was slow, almost slurred, and he spent much of his time lying down even when he was not physically exhausted. We tried to involve him in therapy sessions, but he was resistant. The psychologist reported that he avoided any conversation that required deep introspection, changing the subject, or simply remaining silent. It was as if he had built a wall around himself, but at the same time, he seemed trapped inside it, without the strength to leave. What worried me most was that, despite all the medical and psychological efforts, he seemed to have no desire to get better. Depression is insidious, and in an environment like this, where loneliness and regret are amplified, it can become fatal if not treated properly. As we monitored his health, we knew we were dealing with something that went far beyond the physical. Diddy wasn't just sick, he was lost, and this was visible in every gesture, every word, or lack thereof. It was a grim reminder that sometimes the greatest challenge in prison is not the physical confinement, but the struggle within. Diddy is receiving treatment that mixes emergency approaches and continuous monitoring, but it is not a simple process. When he arrived at the ward in critical condition, our priority was to stabilize his body, which was already severely weakened. We immediately started IV fluids to combat dehydration and provide basic nutrients he wasn't getting. We also administer vitamin and mineral supplements to combat extreme malnutrition. His body was in a state of collapse, and in such cases, any error in replacement could cause further damage. Therefore, we follow a strict protocol, gradually increasing the amount of nutrients to avoid complications such as the so-called refeeding effect, which can be fatal in cases of prolonged starvation. But the biggest challenge was his resistance to treatment. Despite being clearly weakened, he refused to cooperate. There were times when he even refused to receive the serum or medications. On one occasion, he removed the needle from his arm, muttering something like, "It doesn't make any difference." This behavior forced us to maintain constant vigilance to ensure he did not harm himself. Additionally, due to signs of drug use, we begin a controlled detox process. This involved administering medication to alleviate withdrawal symptoms such as nausea, tremors, and body aches. It was a painful process to watch. He alternated between moments of lucidity and intense crises, where he seemed to fight against himself. Psychological support was also integrated into the treatment. Although he showed resistance, we insisted on regular sessions with the prison psychologist. We know that addressing mental health is crucial to any recovery, especially in Diddy's case, where depression appears to be at the heart of his deterioration. Additionally, we are working to encourage you to resume a minimal routine. Small steps, such as leaving the cell for a walk or accepting a light meal, are significant victories in this context. Still, progress has been slow, and its constant reluctance is an obstacle we all face daily. There are days when he seems to improve, where we get a glimpse of the strength he once had. But these moments are rare, and most of the time he remains stuck in this cycle of apathy and resistance. Treatment is being done, but without his will to fight, the results can only go so far. We are monitoring his condition closely, with regular checkups to assess his physical progress, but the real challenge is to rekindle a will to live in him, because without that, no treatment can really work. Working in a prison infirmary is challenging in and of itself, but Diddy's case brought an emotional toll that few of us were prepared to handle. For many nurses here, he's not just another inmate. He's someone who grew up in the spotlight, and seeing such a well-known man fall so low is something that touches us all. When we talk among ourselves, there is a consensus that he is trapped not only physically, but also mentally. One of his colleagues commented that it's as if Diddy is carrying the entire weight of his public life and his personal mistakes, with no one to share the load. For him, prison seems to have become more of a mental punishment than anything else. There are moments when he is completely silent, as if he doesn't even notice our presence. A nurse recently commented that she tried to ask him how he was feeling, and he simply looked at her without responding, as if he didn't even have the energy to form words. It wasn't coldness, it was empty. Another colleague mentioned an episode that stuck with us all. He was adjusting the IV when he heard Diddy mumble something about regrets. He said, "All this I did for nothing. Everything I built, everything I fought for, and look where I am now." It was a painful confession, a moment of vulnerability that reminded us that, behind the fame, he is also human. On the other hand, there is growing frustration among the team. We want to help you, we want to see you improve, but your constant resistance makes the job more difficult. There were times when he tried to refuse even basic care, such as changing bandages or administering medication. These refusals aren't just defiant, they're a constant reminder that he doesn't seem to believe he deserves to be saved. Despite this, no one in the ward gave up on him. We take turns monitoring him, not just for medical reasons, but because we know he needs someone around. Diddy's silence may be deafening, but what he doesn't say is just as important as what he does say. For many of us, he became a symbol of how much prison can break someone who was already fragile. Still, there are times when optimism emerges, even if timidly. A more experienced nurse commented that in situations like this, patience is needed. "He's at rock bottom now," he said, "but sometimes it's down there that people find the will to rise again." We're all rooting for him to find that will, because as challenging as it is to take care of him, no one here wants to see him lose this fight. Completing this story is not easy, because Diddy's future is still full of uncertainty. In the ward, we often discuss what could happen to him. Your current state, both physical and mental, is extremely delicate. We know that he cannot continue like this for long without serious consequences, but we also recognize that change needs to start within him. Diddy is at a critical point. If he can't find the strength to face this situation, his body may not be able to handle it. Malnutrition, damage from drug use, and depression are eating away at their health. On the other hand, there is a chance, albeit small, of recovery if he accepts help. The prison system has protocols to deal with such cases, and a transfer to a more advanced medical unit is being considered. However, even if he receives the best care possible, it won't solve the bigger problem. He needs to want to fight. Without this will, any treatment will only be a temporary solution. For many here, Diddy is a living reminder that prison is not just a matter of deprivation of liberty. It's a place where people face their failures, their regrets, and in cases like his, the very essence of who they are. He's not just a famous inmate, he's a man on the edge, trying to make sense of a situation that seems impossible. Looking ahead, the team's hope is that he can use this period as an opportunity to rebuild. We know it won't be easy, but we also know that, in some cases, you have to hit rock bottom to finally start climbing. For now, we continue to do what we can, monitoring your health, offering medical support, and perhaps most importantly, being there. Even when he doesn't speak, even when it seems like he's given up, we're here. Because in the end, no matter who he is or what he's done, no one deserves to go through this alone. Diddy still has a long way to go. His future in prison will be determined as much by the assistance he receives as by his choice to allow himself to fight. For us, we just have to wait and continue offering everything he needs to find his way back.